And now the Asians are coming for us because they think it was a hustle, and they're right.
So I want to give Mark a chance to respond and then go to Marcia's question.
Only I would add that I think in many ways King models a good model of how you straddle your different identities. He always affirmed he was an American, he was a black man, he was a Christian, he was a Protestant, he was a Baptist. But his message came out of all of that, but his message was for the world. But the way he presented his message, it wasn't arrogant or pretentious for the world. It's just, we have our story. It's a story of suffering and crucifixion. You may not like that process, but here it is, and maybe it's instructive for your situation as it was for East Berlin.
Right.
Marcia.
Yeah, I want to make a comment and end with a question provocation. The purpose of the comment is to draw some through lines to what was said this morning, and including what I said this morning and what was being said here about the problem, that themes that both of you brought up, the problems, faults, transgressions, and the fracturing of our interconnectedness cannot be solved imminently. This was an idea of the theological pragmatists as well as King. And in short, that the way out of tribalism, which is identity politics at its worst, requires us to, as we said, preserve the distinction of the individual and of the individual group, and our interconnectedness simultaneously. Because we are both at the same time. We are distinct, we are singular individuals, we belong to singular faith groups and singular other kinds of groups at the same time as profound interconnectedness. I say this to get back to the transcendent, because I think this is both our ontology. It is the way we are, both singular and interconnected. And it's also our telos. It is the purpose for higher good or unity to which we strive. And that's why we can't solve our societal problems without an ontology and a telos. And that requires a vision and an understanding of the transcendent. This is what King knew. If we are losing the intermediate groups, societal groups, that teach an ontology and teach a telos with reference to a transcendent, then we are sunk because we have no reference. And then we are manipulable with anybody with the resources to manipulate. My provocative question, because you've already heard me push back on binaries. Here comes another. I think everything you've said about the misapplication of the African American experience to any other experience in this country is correct, and something I teach all the time. The immigrant narrative is not the slave narrative. Slaves were not immigrants. On the other hand, to avoid a binary, we don't want to seek into binaries that it's women's experience or African American experience, or the white working class experience versus the African American experience, or the LGBTQ experience versus the African American experience. I think this is one of the things that King fought against, the either or. I'm not suggesting that the same strategies are applicable to all those situations. But I don't think we can accept that it's one group versus other groups. That's a dividing line, and that we should not fall for that, because we need to think about, even for all of the differences in all of the groups that you have mentioned, we need to be able to think about all of them and not fall for, again, that it's one group versus the other. Because we're sunk with that one.
Marcia, you're absolutely right. I'll give you a different analogy. In Germany, there was a reckoning that Germany had to deal with about a singular, unique experience of the Jews. No, there's no question. There's Nuremberg. There were a whole series of trials because there was a unique, without analogy, not in the context of competition, just in the facts. The issue of the slave is not an issue of victim sweepstakes. It's an issue of the truth. Just like in Germany, there had to be a reckoning with the truth. Your point is not about people competing with each other for the sweepstakes or who gets more seats in an elite college. The United States has to deal with a reckoning, with a crime that was committed against humanity. A crime which is unique. And so the Jew has a unique claim on Germany. They do. The slaves, the slave passage, the stuff that in 2018, this country is still not prepared to have a naked conversation about the thing, right? And so I agree with you, but the tough part of the conversation is the United States never reckoned with this. It never told the truth. In 2018, we're still built on a lie, which is compounded by denial. So you lie, then you deny. And I'll tell you, it's so difficult that blacks are scared to have a conversation. Because at one level, some blacks are so scared, I don't want to deal with how mad I get if you pull that scab. Right? So what I'm saying is this. The people of faith, here's a shock. The people of faith, if in this country, the people of faith and conviction said, we got to reckon with this. No games, none of the whips and leather, no Tom Wolf, Radical Sheep, Mau Mau, and the Flake Catchers, right? None of the games. And that reckoning uses the same moral yardstick, because what King did, we haven't talked about this, where was my professor, right? One of the great things about King, right, and I know this from black preachers, King could have a tough conversation with the coloreds when they got in a room privately. And there's an old talk he gave that made run and all the secular blood. We said, look, you got to brush your teeth and comb your hair and act right and all of that, right? And Levinson and those guys lost their mind, because why are you putting this out there? What are you know? And King there was a self-help component to King's thing. And Rusted and those guys did not want to hear that. The United States, this country, and Marsh, you're absolutely right, has got to reckon with this. There's a whole infrastructure of lies. And you're absolutely right. All the games and because even let's take the orientation card. It is not until we tell the truth. Conservative whites, a lot of conservative whites are angry because they know a lot of this is a lie. They know that there's a minority rights hustle that's built on the back of a lie, which, while I don't like it, I can accept it, because there's other stuff that's complete nonsense. And I know it. And I'll just say this on the black community side. The black community is going to have to reckon with this and all of our political and moral contradictions.
Can I just respond?
So I think a response from Marcia, then we have time for one more question, and then the next bunch will come up. Yeah, please. Yeah. So Marcia, Josh, one more question, and then I'll bring up the next group of speakers, because I think what they have to say will add a great deal to this conversation.
Good, Marcia.
So the unique, I hope you didn't misunderstand that I was
Probably
not countering the uniqueness of the slave experience in the United States. It's today in 2018, in dealing with it,
Right.
that we cannot then allow a divide and conquer
I
strategy.
agree. I completely
Because
agree.
this also makes, it makes no strategic sense, but
I
it also
agree.
makes no moral sense. And I'll give you an example from Germany.
Okay.
So Germany, certainly better than almost any other European country,
Right.
has has attempted to deal
Right.
with the Holocaust.
Right.
Whereas other European countries that were complicit have not in any
Right.
way to the same extent.
Right.
And now you get what I think is the fairly obscene phenomenon
Right.
of the German right
Right.
saying, now that we have dealt with our guilt about the Jew, we can be Islamophobic and
Right.
want to
Agreed.
throw the Muslims out.
Agreed.
And this is a divide and conquer splitting technique
Absolutely.
that is neither
You're absolutely
strategically acceptable nor morally acceptable.
Agreed.
Now,
Agreed.
quickly,
Go ahead.
quickly about extending, taking the template of the African American woman and extending it, was that it became a political game. I'm a pluralist. My view is this is the central legal inheritance and cultural inheritance of America that has been fixed on. But justice is the great human question, and then you have another kind of conversation with a different logic and different set of arguments
Right.
about women and others if you wish. But I don't think we use the template and extend it. And I think the Democrats have really done that. So I don't want to set up either or, but I'm saying when they all get mushed together, when black is just an identity group, difference in degree but not kind, then you're in real trouble. And that's what the Democratic Party's done.
Oh, I think we have time for one more question in this panel. Yes.
So I enjoyed the conversation went into identity politics. A lot of people on college campuses today have to deal with identity politics a lot. Obviously, it's in culture and in media, and the next 10, 20 years we're going to have to deal a lot with the identity politics issues. What would be your 2 or 3 sentence response against identity politics towards like a college student who's trying to start ranking people and then say, oh, you don't have a voice because A, B, or C, or you have to get on board with this specific agenda, et cetera.
Should I just? Yeah, sure. So I would say 2 things. One, that identity politics is not a distinction of kinds. It's a fault allocation system. It's a set of relations which indicates transgression with respect to a primary transgressor. And then the question is, can the mystery of fault and transgression be resolved and understood without reference to something higher? And the great experiment is we can do this without reference to something higher. My argument is identity politics is the new code of Hammurabi. It's the oldest document in the world is a series of documents about debt and transgression. We've returned to the code of Hammurabi with identity politics. And the only way out of this is Christianity. Sorry. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say, and it does speak to the Christian point, when you say I have an identity, I say we have no idea who we are. We can't know who we are, except by the long labor of working with our neighbors and our fellow citizens to build a world that God knows what's going to look like, but we don't. And the American invitation is to build a world between 2 peoples who have historically misunderstood each other. One group which has enslaved another. We have no idea what we can build 500 years from now. We have no idea. But we are called to do this. And so if we set up and say, I've got this black identity and I've got this white, there's no way in hell we're going to build the world that we are actually called to build. And it's only with one another we can do this.
Well, on that note, I think I'll call James, Vincent, and Jacqueline to the front. Mark, you stay here and are moderating this panel, because I think that very nicely sets up a discussion of American civil religion and King's role as a saint or prophet of the American creed. So thanks to both of you. Yeah, take that. Yes, okay. Yeah, first. Yes, you should go first.
Good man. Good man.
What time is your?
6:45.
What's it doing?
It's a long ride.
You got a rocket ship in your machine?
We're behind schedule, so we're not taking any breaks. We're going to accelerate. So let me quickly introduce our great speakers. Vincent Loeb is Associate Professor of Theology and Religious Studies at Villanova. He co-edits the journal Political Theology and directs the Villanova Political Theology project. His books include Black Natural Law, Defense of Charisma, and he co-edited Anti-Blackness and Christian Ethics. Our second speaker, James Patterson, is an assistant professor of politics at Ave Maria University in Florida. His research areas include race, religion, and American political development. He has held research positions at the Program for American Values and institutions at Duke University, and the James Madison Program in American Ideals at institutions at Princeton University. Plus, he's had teaching positions at Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia and Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. And then finally, Jacqueline Rivers, whose husband we've already heard from earlier today, several times, is the executive director of the Seymour Institute for Black Church and Policy Studies. She has lectured at Harvard University, the Vatican, the United Nations, and many other venues. She served as a Hutchins Fellow at Harvard University. Her latest publication appears in the volume Not Just Good But Beautiful. She's also published a chapter written with the leading sociologist Orlando Patterson in The Cultural Matrix. So we're looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks to the organizers and to the staff for making this possible, and including me, and thanks to you all for being here. And thanks especially to colleagues who are I'm looking forward to learning from, and I've already learned from, and especially Reverend Rivers, who I recall I first met more than 20 years ago when I was a high school student. I was coming from Minnesota, where I'd gone to Missouri Synod Lutheran schools, and I was spending the summer in Boston. And I met someone who did not look like Pastor Lundquist or sound like Pastor Lundquist, and probably put me on a trajectory to study religion after that. And so I'm appreciative to get a chance to see you again. Although that trajectory to study religion started with an interest in more abstract questions of philosophical theology and law and grace and how they relate in the European tradition. And that's what I wrote my dissertation on, and then I was going to Atlanta to give a job talk. I was trying to get a job at Georgia State University, and the first question I got after this very abstract disquisition on law and grace and the European thought was, how does this relate to Martin Luther King? And at first I thought it was kind of an annoying question because they weren't really appreciating the subtlety of everything I'd been saying. But then I started thinking about it a bit, and I moved to Atlanta to start working there and talking with students here and seeing all the commemoration of King around there. I thought, well, maybe this is something I should reflect on a bit more. I started rereading the letter from Birmingham jail, and in fact, there is a whole lot about God's law in the letter from Birmingham jail. But it also, just reading that text, it feels like it's coming from everywhere. He's finding God's law in Augustine and Tillich, in the Personalists, and Martin Buber. It's not so clear if King has his own sort of natural law theory to contribute. So I kind of put that on the back burner for a while it's back in my sort of abstract thoughts. And then the Martin Luther King monument opened up down the street here in Washington, and I happened to visit it, and they have all these wonderful quotes from Martin Luther King on the walls. But after looking at it for a bit, I realized there are a few things that are missing. There's no Jesus, there's no God, there's no higher law, there's no sin, right? In all these words, it feels in all these words.
Quotation from Isaiah.
And it feels like something's being repressed, right? It feels like something is missing, right? Things that are so central to King himself are missing. But also missing is race, right? Let's transcend our races to a better humanity or something like that. The specificity of King's blackness and his Christianity are both suppressed. And it feels like if something's repressed, there must be power there. Must be power that could be, harnessed and used in our world today, in our political moment today. So I thought, I should probably go back and read some more Martin Luther King, see where that higher law language might be. And as I started reading more and more from his early sermons before he was even a PhD to his late writings, God's law, natural law, higher law, it appears everywhere, right? It's an idea that King keeps going back to, that he's committed in, and that he's serious about. He is a natural law theorist. He's not just using the ideas of others. And then I started thinking, who might be talking about this? And then I remembered someone unexpected, Clarence Thomas, who we've been hearing a bit more about recently. Clarence Thomas' confirmation hearings. But if you actually go back and look at the opening of those confirmation hearings with Joe Biden, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he opens by saying, these hearings are going to be where we find out what Clarence Thomas's views of the natural law are. Because that's what everyone was talking about in the country at the time. There are op-eds in the New York Times saying Clarence Thomas has views of the natural law that just are incompatible with America, right? With religious freedom. Right? And Clarence Thomas began his opening statement by saying, yes, I believe in the natural law, just like Martin Luther King did, just like Frederick Douglass did. I'm part of a tradition of African American and European thinkers who were committed to natural law. So I started thinking, maybe I should not only read Martin Luther King, but I should also read Frederick Douglass and Anna Julia Cooper and W.E.B. Du Bois, who all have things to say about higher law or God's law, and started seeing a tradition there, a tradition that seems to have been lost or forgotten in the current political moment. But just to dwell on King for a moment there, one of the really striking things, apropos of the previous presentation, is that King says, natural law is what prevents me from associating with communism. Right? Communists don't believe in higher law. That's what marks my Christianity and separates me from them. They can just do things for pragmatic purposes. I know there's a moral absolute that can never be questioned. Even from these early sermons, while he was a student, he was going around the country, sort of preaching in his on the weekends. And he would say, one of the problems with our society today, this is in the early 50s, is there's just not enough respect for moral absolutes, for God's law. There are all these little gods that people are putting up, materialism and self-interest and this or that seem to be taking the place of an absolute value, but they're not the absolute, they're idols. And we need to reorient ourselves in the moral framework of God's law. And one of the problems for King there that he names is the pragmatists. So even if we want to associate some of King's ideas with this pragmatic tradition, I think it's important to remember that King was very clear that pragmatism, he stands on the opposed to pragmatism. He calls it survival of the slickest. Right? Pragmatists are those who do not agree to a moral absolute, do not are not on board with God's law. It's a different danger than communism, but also a danger, and one that was being felt at the time and now in the U.S. So from those early sermons to that first speech in Montgomery that Gary was telling us about, when King had 20 minutes to prepare, and he was instead of spending the week writing his sermon, he had to sort of synthesize all of his ideas in the moment and speak words that would unite a community and mobilize them for action. He turned to God's law again at that time and said, this is something that we can agree on, that the laws of segregation are opposed to the law of God. Right? And that law of God is something to which we must be faithful. And even later, King in 1960 went on NBC to debate the segregationist editor James Kilpatrick in front of a national audience. And what King, the sort of foundation of King's argument was that segregation runs counter to God's law. Kilpatrick said, God's law is something that you need to keep in your heart. If you believe it, you can. If you don't believe it, you don't have it. It's up to you. It's an individual matter. King said, no, it's not an individual matter. If God's law runs against the laws of the nation, we need to speak out against the laws of the nation. At the time, the American public was changing, right? The power of God's law in the American imagination was fading. And many people thought that King was losing that debate. Even folks from SNCC who were watching that debate on television, some of them walked away in disgust, thinking that King wasn't being an effective debater because he was invoking this God's law stuff with that mysterious language. And he got letters giving him advice on how to explicate God's law better from different people. Then he actually incorporated some of the ideas. There's a graduate student at the University of Minnesota who sent him a letter saying, there's some ideas from Cicero here that might help you a bit if you add. And he verbatim started including some of these quotes in his speeches on God's law. So in thinking about King, I don't think it's just rhetorical oomph that he gets from this phrase God's law or natural law. I want to say he's a natural law thinker, a natural law theorist. And in some ways this is like the more familiar European or specifically Catholic natural law tradition, that there's an account of human nature, reflection on it leads to normative conclusions. If those normative conclusions run counter to the laws of a nation, then those laws of the nation are no law at all. Right? The element of human nature that is salient is the way that the human image is God, right? And because of the way that the human image is God, right, you get to these normative conclusions, right? So the basic structure, I think, is familiar from other ways that natural law has been thought about and theorized, and volumes and volumes and volumes written about it. But there are also some unique elements, and I think there are three particularly important unique elements in the account that King gives. One of them is about, what is it in the human that images God? So where, it's often reason that's said to image God, and in the European and specifically Catholic tradition, or at least some strands of the Catholic tradition, Aquinas, maybe not Bonaventure, but Aquinas, right? For King, emotion is also characteristically human. Emotion is also, our capacity to have emotion is also the way that the human images God. So it's emotion and reason together, that mix of emotion and reason that distinguish the human and give the human the sort of capacity to sort of reason to normative conclusions. And that I think is crucial for King. Second, for King, in distinction from these other natural law traditions, natural law is discerned in community. You can't just sit alone in your office in the university and sort of come up, here are the 5 principles of natural law, and here's how you apply them to the world. No, right? It's King is talking with an audience, with a congregation. He's inviting a collective discernment of natural law rather than sort of propounding a theory that he's come up with. And I think in general that's an important component to keep in mind. And thirdly, the most important element of natural law for King, at least in my view, is the critical component, right? The critique of idolatry, right? Rather than the positive content, right? So the idea here is that, for King, well, in general, it's much easier to say what God is not than to say what God is, right? Being merely human and all. And it's much easier to see things that purport to be godly but really are not, purport to be absolute but really are not. We can have a lot of confidence about that. Ideas and people who set themselves up as absolute, we can have a lot of confidence that there's something wrong there. Those are idols. It's much harder to sort of fill in the positive content. So the focus of King's account of natural law is this critical element. Secular theorists might call it ideology critique. You might call it critique of idols from a Christian or a theological perspective. I think these go together. But what King does is link this capacity for reason and emotion together, discerning in community, this critique of the ways of the world, right? Critique of the ideas of the wealthy and the powerful that set themselves up as idols. And this is part of a tradition. Frederick Douglass was also saying slavery runs against God's law, right? Anna Julia Cooper, this sort of amazing Washington, D.C. Figure who lived into her hundreds, got her PhD from the Sorbonne when she was 65, writing in French about the Haitian Revolution, really wonderful community organizer, and devoted Anglican. I went to her archives over at Howard. People don't talk about her religion, but she has all these poems she wrote, Christian poems that she wrote of devotion in her archives, and also spoke about natural law, higher law. And if you read her talk against the background of her devotion and her Christian formation, it appears that talk of higher law is much more substantial. And even Du Bois, right, often usually seen as a secular figure, right, moves beyond just a secular sociology toward some sort of spiritual awareness that there's some sort of a soul, right, that leads to normative conclusions. It can show you how the laws of the world are not absolute. But then there's a decline, right? The reaction to King in his debate against Kilpatrick is one that marks the falling away of natural law from the American political tradition, and it falls away from the African American